Greetings, this is Rob from Android Community, and today we're going to take a look at the newest offering from Motorola, the Moto G. And this one is not necessarily the follow-up, but the device that came after the Moto X. In this case, the Moto G is probably best known for the back covers, which come off. Motorola sells replacement back covers. They call them shells. They're available in a variety of colors. They sell for $15, so it's fairly reasonable to think that people can buy, one or two and kind of swap them out. The key here with this phone is the price. Motorola has it dropped pretty low. It's pretty aggressive. $179 for an 8GB, $199 for the 16GB. And while the obvious comparison here would be to the Moto X, the other Motorola handset, we have a hard time keeping with that train of thought, and we sort of compare it more to the Nexus 5. Looking at the Moto G as the mid-range handset to go with, and the Nexus 5 as the top-tier handset to go with. That is, of course, assuming you're looking for a contract-free phone. But that said, the Moto G, while it has a low price, it also steps down a bit in specs. Instead of a 1080p display, we're looking at 720. In this case, it's 4.5 inches, but size aside, it also has a Snapdragon 400 processor and only 1GB of RAM, which a lot of what we're looking at these days has Snapdragon 600 or even an 800 processor and 2GB of RAM, and in some cases 3GB of RAM. We've been playing with this phone for about a week now, and we've done the benchmark testing in our review. We purposely, in this case, held off on the benchmarks until after we spent some time with the phone because we didn't want it to cloud our judgment. Needless to say, the benchmarks revealed the specs, or revealed the numbers that we expected. But day-to-day performance, the phone has been solid. As you can see here, scrolling around, it's smooth, no worries there. You can see from the apps here, we have some streaming music, we've done some, web surfing, some reading, cloud stuff with Evernote and storage, we have messaging, we have pictures, basic gaming. The one thing we sort of lacked here, but social networking. To that point, we've tried to recreate what the average user is going to do with the phone. Take it off the charger in the morning, use it for messages during the day, check Facebook during the day, maybe play a game of Blitz or two when you should be working, and, otherwise some phone calls, some calendar use. Nothing heavy. Motorola says that they should be able to provide up to 24 hours of battery life. Although on an admittedly light use day, we dragged that out to well over 24 hours before we got down to the 10% mark. So not only is the phone a solid performer in our experience, but it's also been really, really good in terms of battery life. The camera was more than acceptable, not great. It was, hit or miss depending on certain circumstances. We'll have some image samples in the written review, as well as some video samples, so you can check those out and see what they look like. Certainly not anything to get upset about. Not the best, obviously, but the bottom line here is Motorola went after the no contract market, and they went after it pretty aggressive in this case. Those who waited for Google to release the Nexus 5 and snap it up the instant it went available may not be the right market for this. But for those people who have friends and family members that are looking for a phone they can buy and just use with a carrier without contract, this is a solid recommendation so far. In our experience, that's what we've found. Here in the US, it's GSM at the moment, which is basically going to be your AT&T or T-Mobile. Buy the phone, put a SIM in there, and sign up for a plan and get going. Otherwise, Verizon has said they're going to put it on their prepaid lineup, which means it'll be a CDMA at that point. That's coming in January. And otherwise, for now, the Moto G is running Android 4.3, though KitKat is expected in January. And then taking a quick look at the phone itself. The one side here is clean and clear, nothing. The top, you have your headphone jack. The other side, you have your power button and your volume. And the bottom, you have your micro USB for charging. Nothing exciting, nothing out of the ordinary. You have your speaker on the back, as well as your camera and flash, and then the Motorola dimple logo, which strangely always seems to find your finger when you're holding it. Otherwise, we have the front-facing camera and the earpiece up top, and this one, similar to the Moto X, has that kind of curved back, which is nice in your hand. These back covers, these flips, or these shells are pretty smooth. Wouldn't say slippery, but there's certainly no grip or texture to them. But overall, this is been a solid handset in our experience. The one complaint that we have is the weight. The phone feels heavy. You know, we're only talking a matter of grams here, but as compared to the Moto X or even the Nexus 5, which both weigh in at 130 grams, the Moto G at 143 grams certainly feels a bit different in your hand. Granted, in the long scheme, it's not going to be any different, and likely those who are picking up a Moto G who don't pick up 3 or 4 phones a day probably won't notice the difference, but nonetheless, it's something worth pointing out. Anyway, again, this was Rob from Android Community, and we're taking a look at the Moto G, so make sure you take a look at the full written review that will accompany this video.